Hi, Cherise.
Hi, Scotty. How are you today?
I am good, and welcome everybody to What Drives Her, the podcast from A Girl's Guide to Cars. And please welcome my co-host today. I have a special co-host, Cherise Threewitt, who is a automotive journalist and writer. You'll find her in our pages as well as other magazines and websites around the automotive world. And Cherise, you did something really cool not that long ago that resulted in today's podcast. Tell us about who we're going to talk to today.
Today we are talking to my favorite writer of all time, Susan Orlean. I met Susan on her recent book tour when she was in Chicago, and during our Q&A session happened to ask her a question about the title of her book, Joyride, her new memoir, right here. And then she and I spoke while she was signing my book after, and I mentioned I would love the opportunity to talk to her more about it. I have followed Susan's career very closely and always kind of got the sense that cars were always part of her life. And so today we're going to be talking to Susan about the role that cars have played in her life, about some of her career milestones, including a profile of someone who meant very much to both Scotty and I.
But for a little more context, what has Susan written that the average
Susan wrote the book The Orchid Thief, which is a New York Times bestseller, and it became the basis for the movie adaptation, which is one of the funniest book-to-movie adaptations of all time, which is the point of the movie.
It has a great cast, by the way.
Meryl
Streep, and I forget who else is in it, but
Meryl Streep plays Susan Orlean. Yep. Like, how epic is that?
That is like the dream for any writer to write something.
Yeah.
Meryl Streep.
And Susan also wrote a profile. It's been published under a couple different titles. It's been published under the title Life's Swell, and it's been published under the title Surf Girls of Maui. But that magazine article became the basis for the movie Blue Crush.
Another one that is just incredible. These young girls who challenge the world of surfing, a world that they, were very natural in, but maybe not so welcome in. And
the book and the movie are the magazine article and the movie are a little bit different. The girls she actually profiled in the magazine article were quite a bit younger than the movie characters became, but it's still an inspiring story. It's one of my favorite comfort food movies of all time. If I'm in a bad mood, I put that on and I feel better.
It's amazing. That's so good. I don't know. For me,
because of that magazine article, I went to Hawaii on my honeymoon and took a surfing lesson.
You did. I'm chicken to take a surfing lesson, but maybe one of these days. I don't know. We'll see. All right. Should we, let's go to the conversation with Susan Orlean. Welcome, Susan Orlean. Susan, it is such a thrill to have you here with us on What Drives Her, the podcast from A Girl's Guide to Cars. And also, please welcome Cherise Threewitt. Cherise is one of our contributors. She is an automotive writer. I think she's written some really cool stuff, including, Cherise, wasn't there a story that you wrote about going clothing optional at a car event?
Yeah, I wrote for Car and Driver about a car show at a nudist colony in Wisconsin.
That sounds like heaven.
You are very adventurous. I will give you credit for that. You are very adventurous. And thank you so much for suggesting and inviting Susan to be with us today. And I'm going to turn this over to you to talk about Susan's latest project, her memoir. Cherise, take it away.
So we are here today to talk about Susan's memoir, Joyride. I have my copy right here. My mommy bought it for me. Susan, so when you met my mom and I in Chicago about a month ago at this point, my mom is so thrilled I'm doing this, by the way. She read your book in a few days, and she's now on her second read-through of it.
Wow. That's an amazing compliment.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, my mom lives in Massachusetts where I grew up. She was visiting me in Chicago for Halloween, so that's how the timing worked out there, because she likes to hang out with my son on Halloween, and because my kid loves Halloween. So she was on her annual visit here, and I told her when she was coming in, I said, Mom, I'm going to this event to see my favorite writer downtown, and I would love for you to come with me. And she was like, well, I'll think about it. And then as it approached, she was like, oh, is she the one who wrote the Orchid book? And I said, yeah. And I gave my dad a copy of the book at some point, and I believe my mom must have picked it up and read it. So she was really excited. And as I mentioned to you offline, my mom finally understands my job a little bit. So thank you for that, having spoken to you and listened to you speak about your book.
Yes, well, that's a challenge to get people to understand what it is. It looks like you're just playing or goofing around. It doesn't seem like a legitimate profession.
Especially as a freelancer. It's like, what do you mean you write for everyone? So I finished the book recently, and I actually ended up buying a second copy of it so I could read it on my Kindle and email notes to myself as I read. So it was phenomenal. Left me with probably even more questions than I had before, but let's get into it. So let's talk about, tell us why you chose Joyride as your title.
We were really struggling with the title. Picking a title for a book is really challenging. It's going to be the forward-facing kind of interaction that a reader or casual browser is going to have. So it's really important, and it has to convey enough about the book to be helpful, but it can't say what the whole book is about. You know, it's a very tricky thing. And titling a memoir, I feel, is even more challenging because you're grappling with a book that is, you are the subject. So that's a bit of a trick. We had a working title, which was just to have some title, and that was True Story. And I never liked it, but it served as just a placeholder. I have had a picture on my computer desktop for years and years and years. It's a picture that a friend took of me when we were, I think, at Disneyland, but it may be another amusement park. I cannot recall. But I'm in a little, kind of go-kart car, and I am laughing with incredible jubilation. And, what could be more fun than driving in these crazy little cars? And I'm just laughing and laughing and laughing. And it just a picture to me that conveyed joy. So this picture was very precious to me. And as we were kind of working towards a point where we needed a title, the word Joyride just flashed in my head. It was related to that picture, the joy of being in a little car, riding fast and, laughing and enjoying myself. But also I loved the other meaning, the meaning that I first knew the word to mean, which was you hotwire a car, you take it for a drive, you mean no harm, you bring the car back more or less to where you hotwired it, and you just take it for a ride for the fun of driving the car. It dawned on me that being a nonfiction writer in certain ways is very much like a joyride. You step into another world or another person's life. You ride along with it for a period of time, and then you return it, one hopes, unharmed, and tell the story of what you learned on this adventure. So the word instantly conveyed these two things, the joy of just pure joy, which was what I wanted to talk about, because I do love my work, but also this idea of taking another entity, another person, another subculture, and taking it out for a ride, sort of stepping inside it, and then telling the story of what you experience. It was instantly the right title for the book.
I went into the book kind of hoping for an anecdote about you hot wiring a car at some point in your life.
Well, I would have loved to. And I grew up very much with cars present in my life. I grew up in Cleveland, kind of in the Rust Belt, the heart of, the Lordstown plant, the, automobile manufacture was very present in my childhood. But also my dad was an enormous car lover. And it was a huge part of my childhood was the cars. My parents got new cars every year. My dad, when he got older, had multiple cars. I think at one point he had 4 cars. He absolutely loved cars. And he would tell me about joyriding when he was a kid. Now, I wasn't adventurous enough, nor do I know how to hotwire a car. So it wouldn't have been possible for me to do it. But it was very much present in my childhood, this idea of my dad being a little bit of a bad boy when he was a kid and joyriding. And because of his passion for cars, I think automobile imagery was very recognizable to me. And it was so much part of my dad's life. And then he bought us cars very young. So I always had a car from the time I was 16. And I even briefly had 2 cars, which I lived in New York City at the time. And believe me, it's something you don't want to do. But through accident of fate and coincidence and so forth, I had 2 cars living in New York City. And, a lot of people who live in New York don't even have 1 car. But it was always very, I would have felt really naked without a car, even living in New York City. It was so much part of my identity. I was a suburban kid. We all got our driver's license the day we turned 16. And it represented mobility, freedom, adulthood, and the chance for escape, which when you live in New York City, that becomes very palpable. The idea that you want to get up and go. You don't want to call a cab. You don't want to wait for a subway. You just want to be able to go. That was very fundamental to me.
I've read most of your work, if not all of your work, and I always noticed that even if you didn't go into details about specific cars, you always talked about them in a way that kind of conveyed their importance to whatever other story you were telling. I remember specifically the Maui Surfer Girls story, how you were talking about driving 2 of them from one end of the island to the other to go to their coach's house. And you had hated your rental car, but the girls loved it. So it sort of took on kind of a glow because these cool surfer girls liked my rental car. And that line has stuck with me since I first read that story, however long ago that was.
That's really funny because I remember the incident so well. And it was, I always have been very purposeful about the cars I've driven. And it's funny because I have a lot of friends who just go buy a car. They don't care about it. I think having grown up with a father who was so interested in cars and would take us to the auto museum in Cleveland regularly, and he really saw it as an art form and this kind of consummate identity signifier. So, I've always had friends who they just go to Toyota, say, give me a car, and that's their car. But I've never been able to do that. I've never been able to say it's just a machine. I don't care. It's felt like it represented something about me. So in the case of the Maui Surf Girls, it was very funny because when you go rent a car, they just give you whatever they've got. And usually, I'm not dissing Toyota, but I'm just saying it's usually some sedan as some kind of very ordinary car with no style and it feels so awkward to me because I'm in this vehicle that feels so out of sync with how I identify myself. These young women, surfers who were so cool, and everything they did was cool, and everything about them was the grooviest, most aspirational, particularly for someone like me who wasn't a surfer, and I was so awed by their coolness. And when I picked them up in my sort of dowdy sedan, I thought, oh God, I wanted to say to them, look, this isn't who I am. This happens to be what I got at Avis. And they, in their inimitable fashion, were like, they just designated it as being cool. Like, oh, this car is so cool. And it wasn't cool at all, but they seized on it in some way as being this very adult, very cool vehicle. And immediately I started looking at it thinking, okay, well, maybe it is kind of cool, actually. And I think a lot of it was the magic of these young women and the way that they had such absolute enthusiasm. They were so passionate about whatever they did, whatever they loved, that they brought an element of coolness to it, regardless of whether it was actually cool or not.
So how come more of your history with cars didn't make it into the memoir?
That's a good question. I think I was so preoccupied with telling the story of my professional life that I was kind of light on some of the more anecdotal material. And it's funny because, for instance, I've driven across country many times, and I know so many people who never have. And I'm so surprised by it. It was something I drove across country with my family when I was 5 years old. I mean, my dad loved a road trip, so we did a lot of road trips. So it was very much part of who I was. But I think in the interest of space, I was slim on some of the details of my the parts of my identity that were less immediately connected to my professional life.
So you mentioned, I have in my notes of the cars that you mentioned specifically, you mentioned a Camaro, a Miata, and a Passat wagon. What other cars have you had that were memorable to you?
When my father passed away, he had a Mercedes convertible, and I'm forgetting which model, but he really loved it. It really meant a lot to him. And so my brother and sister and I kind of passed it around among ourselves for a few years because we just didn't want to sell it. And it was an extremely heavy car. I mean, even though it looked like a sports car, it was the heaviest car I've ever driven. And so it wasn't actually much fun to drive. It was beautiful. It was a very beautiful car. But it was so precious to my dad that, I kept it for a while. I got a Tesla early on. I have since traded it for another electric car because I didn't want a Tesla anymore.
Tell us what the electric car is that you traded it for.
I have a Kia EV6. Yeah,
Nice.
which I like a lot and think is a pretty
Ooh.
pretty groovy car. I had a BMW wagon for a while. Had a Mini Cooper, which I loved. I absolutely loved. I'm not sure they're the best cars, but it was the cutest car I've ever had. So I loved that. For a number of years, I would get my brother would buy a car and then hand it down to me. So I had an Audi. It was actually my an Audi sedan that was really one of my favorite cars that I ever had. I thought it was such a wonderful car. Unfortunately, it got totaled. And I had a Toyota, the big SUV, which was, I'm forgetting, not a not a Land Cruiser, but it was a
Sequoia.
huge,
The Sequoia.
not a Sequoia. I'm forgetting what it was, but it was gigantic. And I'm not a big person. And it was the biggest car I ever had. And I always felt like this little doll sitting in this, gigantic vehicle. It was very, very awkward, very uncomfortable for me.
Ooh.
So I've had a lot of
That's
cars,
right up my alley.
and I've never kept. I had a Rabbit, which I loved. I absolutely loved. Yeah, I really loved it. I've never kept my cars very long. I tend to, be like a 2-year car person, which I blame on my parents because they got, we would look forward to the fall because they got, when the new models were released and we would be so excited waiting to see what cars they were getting. So they kind of trained me to not be someone who drove a car into the ground, but rather somebody who, had a car, enjoyed it, and then traded it in a year for the next one. I'm like that with my phone too. I'm ready for the next model to see what cool new features are in that new car. Also, I've moved around among many different brands. I'm not somebody who's been loyal strictly to one brand at all. I mean, I've had a couple of Volkswagens over the years. I had 2 Mini Coopers, but this is my first Kia, the one that I've got. Although we had, as a family car, that Kia smaller SUV that was the most reliable car ever, and it had like 200,000 miles on it, and it literally never had anything wrong with it. And we kept driving it and driving it and driving it, and it was like a robo car. It was like nothing ever goes wrong with this car. And it's the kind that they use for cabs a lot in New York City. And oh no, sorry, it was a Ford Escape. I'm wrong. It was a Ford Escape, not a Kia. My apologies. The Ford Escape that would not die. And we sold it to someone when it had like 200,000 miles on it because it was absolutely perfect and never had a single problem. And, we would see them as cabs in New York a lot. And we thought, we get it. We understand. This is an indestructible car. It just keeps going. I like cars that have, I'm very sensitive to styling. And so I like cars that look cool. I've never owned just a boring looking sedan. It just feels that's not me. I haven't been able to kind of embrace just an ordinary kind of, I don't even know what you call it. They're just sort of the standard car. Now I have use of, although I don't use it very often. My son has a Suzuki Cappuccino, which is a little Cape car. and he's worked on it, and it's the cutest car ever. And it's so eye-catching that you have to be in the mood to have a million people look at you when you drive it. I don't use it very often, but it's here. When he's away at college, it lives at home, and it's available for my use. I don't think my husband can fit in it, so he never drives it, but I can fit in it. But if you're familiar with them, they are half the size of a small car, but they're the cutest, coolest little cars. It has a right-hand drive, so it does require a little kind of mental gymnastics when you drive it, but the car is so small that it's not very challenging to have a right-hand drive.
Is it a stick shift?
Yep.
No, believe it or not, it is not a stick shift. That would be hard to shift with your left hand. No, it's an automatic, shockingly enough. But it has a tiny, tiny, tiny engine. So you can't take it on the freeway I think the maximum speed is 85 miles an hour. They have like lawnmower engines practically. But it is so cute. And, I've never wanted a car that was so, that drew so much attention that you were constantly being flagged down at red lights by people who wanted to, like, talk to you about your car. But I've never wanted a car that was so bland and ordinary that it didn't feel like me. I think that's the thing. You want a car that feels like you, if you're sensitive to that stuff. I know there are lots of people who just say, I don't care, it's just a car.
Yeah, I think that's unfair to yourself to say, I don't care, it's just a car. Because you spend so much time in it, and it's a reflection of you. It's the first outfit people see you in.
Yes. And similarly, I have trouble just like putting on sweatpants and saying, I don't care, I'm just covering my body. But I agree. And I think living now in Los Angeles, where you are in your car a lot, and it is a signifier, it is a statement. And your statement may be, I'm very practical and I'm very sensible, and I don't need to demonstrate more than that. But I am drawn to cars that feel like an extension of the clothes I would wear or the jewelry I would wear. I like it to feel that it is in some way consistent with how I see myself.
So we talked a little bit about that as well, the time that you spend in your car in Los Angeles. So how does that play into, or does it play into rather, your decision to record all your own audiobooks?
I have become a massive audiobook consumer. And I will say it's made me look forward to driving in a way. I mean, I love to drive. I'm one of those people who just enjoys the physical act of driving. I really do. And I fancy myself a very good driver. My dad taught me to drive and, treated it like this is an art form to perfect. It's not just you need to pass your driving test. It's like, it's this cool kind of exercise of physics and perspective, and and I really enjoy driving. I used to listen to lots and lots of music in the car, and then my husband became an audiobook devotee, and I thought, I don't want to do that, and I don't want to consume books in little tiny pieces, 10 minutes in the car, another 10 minutes in the car. So I will say, in LA, you're in your car often, but I'm never in it for very long. you do end up carving a very particular portion of the city that usually is where you do most of what you do in the course of a day. You're not driving long distances. I work at home, so I'm not commuting anywhere. But I had begun recording my own audiobooks. As audiobooks became more and more popular, listeners really preferred authors to read their own books. And it became a kind of standard in the industry that unless you were not a good reader, and some people aren't, readers really liked it when the author read the book. So I began reading my own books with my book Rin Tin Tin, and I really enjoyed it. I decided then to read all my subsequent books, but at that time I was not a consumer of audiobooks. I just felt like this is what people like, to have me read it. And I would occasionally have people say to me, "Oh, I just finished listening to your book and I loved your reading of it." And I thought, oh, that's nice to know. I never listened to them, so I had no idea. In any event, I one day just decided, all right, I'm going to try an audiobook and I'm going to try it in the car. And I'll see if I felt like it would be too many brief interactions with the book and that it would be distracting to not read more of it all at once. Well, it was almost like I instantly got hooked. If you're in your car for 15 or 20 minutes, you actually can consume like a whole chapter of a book. It was so pleasurable. And I began having a few of those driveway moments where I would arrive where I was going and I wanted to finish the chapter, and I would sit there and finish. For one thing, the number of books I was able to read probably tripled. I was listening every chance I had, even if I was only driving 10 minutes. And I never lost the thread of the book. It was never as disruptive as I worried that it would be. So it made me feel even more committed to reading my own books, because I felt there's something very intimate about listening to an audiobook, because you feel as if it's being told to you directly in a very personal way. As a result, I decided this year to actually go back and record The Orchid Thief, which was the only one of my books that I hadn't recorded. I decided that it would be worth it to me to go back and re-record that and re-release it as an audiobook, so that now I've done all of them.
I love that you do that, Susan. And I will say, every time, I'm an audiobook fanatic as well. In fact, I listen to them in the car and in the grocery store and at Nordstrom and anywhere that I go. I have my AirPods in and I'm listening to an audiobook while I'm walking around, just, kind of through life, on an airplane, in an airport, wherever. But I love that when I listen to you read a book and I'm done, I feel like I just spent a week with you. And you told me this amazing story, if it's about you or about, something, whatever it is, memoirs and personal books I especially love, because I feel like I really get to know you and you talk to me.
Well, I think that that's what makes it so interesting. I mean, there are a lot of discussions and research into the question of, do we absorb books the same way if we read them versus hear them? But hearing books is traditionally the way we told stories was orally. That's, very fundamental to human communication. And I think there's an intimacy of having someone telling you a story in your ear that's really profound. And that isn't to say that reading a physical book is less profound or intimate. It's just a different experience where you don't feel the sort of literally in the moment relationship with the writer, as if they are telling you the story for the first time ever. It's really powerful. And I think there's a way that, well, recently I had never listened to audiobooks on airplanes, and I did on this crazy long book tour, and it was unbelievable to sit on an airplane. Sometimes I would close my eyes and listen for 4 hours to a book. And it was so relaxing, and it was so great. I felt like I was having a private audience with the writer. It was absolutely wonderful.
You guys might convert me. I'm not an audiobook person. I also don't drive that much. So when I'm in the car or when I'm on an airplane, that's my music time, because I don't really get to listen to my own music at home. I can't listen to music when I'm working, and then like if I have my kid, he'll sometimes be wanting to listen to what I listen to, like he's getting into like 90s alt rock and that kind of stuff that I tend to put on, but then he'll be like, "Oh mama, no, I want Mickey Mouse or I want Bluey or whatever." So yeah, you might convert me. I might give The Orchid Thief a chance because that's my favorite book. So that will be an interesting one.
It's a very fresh new audiobook. You know, it's interesting because I really didn't think I would be an audiobook person. It has cut down on my music listening. There's no question, because when I'm in the car, and the minute I finish one book, I'm on to the next. I almost never have more than a day before I download my next book. I like always having a book going.
Fair trade-off.
And it has cut down on my music.
Yeah.
And yet it's increased my reading so much that I feel like, well, that I'm okay with that trade-off. But also I feel like I'm so engaged in the book that it makes reading feel, driving, go really fast. Whereas music doesn't make driving go fast. Listening to an audiobook makes it go fast. And my husband and I have a house in Santa Barbara, so the one commute we do with some regularity is about an hour and a half to Santa Barbara. So he and I are listening to our own book that we listen to together. And that's really great because you can't physically read with someone else. So an audiobook is something you can share with another person, and that's kind of a cool feature, especially sitting in a car. And I love music. I started my career writing about music. I, am very much a music consumer, but sometimes I get choice fatigue where I can't think of what I want to listen to. I'm slightly sick of all my playlists. I sort of broke up with Sirius XM because I started feeling like they had a very narrow playlist that they just rotated over and over again. A book has a different reward. And I am very sympathetic with people who are skeptical about audiobooks because I was for so long. And then when I got hooked, I got really hooked. And now I also, I find the eye strain of reading limits how much reading I do in a day. But I can listen to an audiobook endlessly. And like reading on an airplane for 4 hours would be too much for me. It just, my eyes would be too tired. But listening for 4 hours, boy, I just didn't want to get off the plane, which is really saying something, since most of the time you can't wait to get off a plane. But I'm reading a very long book right now. Or listening to a very long book right now, Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. And, you know, having hours and hours to listen is just like, it's heaven. It's really heaven. And it's a long, long book that I kept putting off reading because I felt like I didn't have the stamina to read a 500-page book. And may I recommend it? It's like such an amazing audiobook.
Thank you for the recommendation. I'm putting that on my list.
It's so good. It's so great. I mean, if you don't like Westerns, if you have no interest in that period of time, it may not appeal to you, but it's really about human relationships, and it's very much historical fiction in a amazing way. Gives you a sense of what the Great Plains and Texas were like in, you know, after the Civil War, but when it was still really a hard life. And it's such a great book. It deserved the Pulitzer, which it very appropriately won.
So, shift gears a little bit, so to speak. We want to talk a bit about one of your profiles from, I believe it was February 2001. So I'm sure you know which one I'm referring to. So Jean Jennings was very influential to Scotty and I, as well as many of the other people in our industry. She was the first female editor of an automotive magazine, and she was the first, I believe it was the first female editor whose magazine won a National Magazine Award. Is that correct, Scotty?
She actually led the very first automotive magazine to win a National Magazine Award, which was for an article written by Jamie Kitman.
Yeah. So tell us about your experience, how you found Jean and decided to profile her.
I met Jean through Jamie Kitman, as a matter of fact. I was struck immediately by her, first of all, just her position as being the editor of the magazine, which struck me. It was a very noteworthy position for a woman to be in. And I immediately thought that she was somebody who might be interesting to write about because of that. But in addition, you know, my pre-existing interest in cars, you know, I already had this kind of childhood sort of familiarity with the passion for cars and interest in cars. So I was predisposed to be interested. But when I met Jean, she was such a distinctive, smart, funny, just charismatic figure that I immediately knew that it was a great story. I mean, even if she hadn't been the editor of the magazine, she was a person whose was written in capital letters. She was a very notable, distinctive, appealing, charismatic, I think is a fair description. And she was wide open in a way that was really wonderful. It made it really appealing to me to write about her, because she welcomed, I stayed at her house. We went on a road trip together, went to the auto show together. And she was entirely natural in my presence. I mean, writing about another writer is never easy. You would think it would be easy, but it's actually tricky. You're maybe more self-conscious in a way of knowing that the person you're writing about knows exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're doing it. So there's a way in which makes you a bit more self-conscious than writing about someone who is entirely out of the field and has no pre-assumptions about how you're going to behave. But she took it very much in stride. Like, she didn't make me feel that anxiety of, oh, this is, the pot calling the kettle black kind of awkwardness. Nor did she get kind of nosy about what I was doing. She really let me do the story as I wished. A lot of what really appealed to me was her incredible good humor. She was really funny and had a wonderful, droll way of looking at the world, looking at her industry, looking at what she did, looking at herself. That was so appealing. I really had a fantastic time writing about her. And I also was really happy to be writing about something that I was sure wouldn't have gotten written about. I just knew that had I not done that, it's not as if someone else was going to do that story. I just felt quite sure that nobody would have written that story had I not gone for it. The New Yorker was very open to it, which I am glad of, and they were very encouraging. And it's really one of my favorite stories. I read it again not that long ago, and I felt, especially in the wake of Jean passing away, it gave me a lot of pleasure of feeling that if I were her, I would have felt very well represented, both in her humor, her intelligence, and her kindness. She was a very good-hearted, generous, kind person, which I thought was really amply evident. I spent a decent amount of time with her, actually, and because I stayed at her house and then went on this road trip, I felt I had more exposure to her than you often have with someone you're writing about. I'm really proud of the piece, and you don't write a profile to please the person you're writing about, but I felt that she would have felt that it was a real three-dimensional portrait of her that would have rung true to her. And so I'm very pleased about that. I think also in the world at large, the idea that women, A, care about cars, B, write about cars, C, run car companies, that is not a well-known fact. Obviously, it is not the majority or the plurality or perhaps even close to being equally represented in the industry, but it's not there. And it felt like, boy, this is a huge blind spot in sort of in the culture, this idea that women have no relationship to the automotive industry besides, insisting that there are cup holders in their cars, which, that's the standard that, you go to you look at a car with your husband and your husband is interested in all of the performance features. And the wife says, if there aren't cup holders, I'm not buying the car, and it's probably one of the remaining kind of most sexist sort of.
I get that all the time. People will say, "Oh, and look at all the cup holders," and I'm like, "Yeah, thank you for pointing that out."
Scotty, how do you feel when you're at a launch event and the automaker rep comes around to show us how many golf bags can fit in the trunk?
Oh, how about how I feel?
That's still a standard for
I will feel emerging onto the highway. How about that?
Yeah.
So my answer is, and that's how many strollers will fit because the longer umbrella strollers are about the same size as a golf bag. So I immediately translate that.
Because that's what they're really saying.
That's
Yeah.
me. But
Yeah.
I like to ask them where they put their purse.
Yes. And it's funny because I am pretty ignorant about the sort of mechanism and physics of how cars work, but I'm very sensitive to performance and the feel of a car, and I'm as capable as anyone would be in saying, I want to feel how this drives. But it's just interesting because you do feel like you're being telescoped back to 1951 when
Right.
you're at a car dealer. And that gave me, one of my missions as a writer has always been to try to illuminate um, things that we take for granted, that we don't look at, that we accept, but just never actually clock in our mind that this subculture exists, or that people are interested in that, or that's been what I've found as a journalist to be the most satisfying. So the profile of Jean Jennings, both, I just thought she was a really interesting person and really fun to write about, but I had this other very satisfying experience with it, which was knowing that there would be a lot of readers who would say, a lady running a car magazine? Wow. A lady with, I knew that it would be a very contrarian sort of story to put forward. And that gave me a lot of pleasure. And she was such a wonderful kind of avatar for that, being who she was, being as confident as she was, and savvy, and very aware of the challenge of being a woman in the automotive industry, and it didn't faze her at all. And I thought that was just wonderful.
And we're grateful to you for your article because it did very much at the time, and certainly the subject being Jean brought to the forefront the idea that women can do this. And even over the last 15 or 20 years, I think Mary Barr has been in her job for probably 12 or 13 years. We've seen a rise of so many women in the industry. But I'll tell you, the crazy thing is, and I don't know if you know this statistic, women buy or influence 85% of all car purchases. That's, $500 billion a year in brand new cars, only brand new cars. That doesn't include like used cars and car supplies and maintenance and that kind of thing. Women are hugely forceful, but they're seen as being very secondary. There's not a lot of media that caters to them, that talks about cars the way you just described your experience. And a lot of the media really expects the reader to be knowledgeable about the mechanics of a car. And I like to equate it as I don't need to know how to sew this jacket in order to wear this jacket, right? And
Actually, that's a great analogy.
And you know if it fits you, and if it looks good on you, and if it's comfortable, if it's going to do the job. Is it warm enough? Is it too warm? We know these things instinctually, and a lot of I think dealers, because they want to sort of pigeonhole you and make you afraid when it comes to making that purchase, and or just the enthusiast media is just so enthusiastic that they sort of box us out of that conversation. And seeing people like Jean, Jean she wasn't like an advocate for women in automotive. Jean was just Jean, and that's what Jean did. And Jean was a force of nature. She just did what she did, and she was very unafraid to do the things that she did. And she believed, very much in her mission. And to see a woman being able to step out of that traditional female role and do the thing that she was passionate about was pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. So we have one last, I'm gonna, because we're almost at an hour. So we have one last question. Um, I'm gonna let Cherise ask the question about fearlessness.
Would you consider yourself fearless? Do you think of yourself as, because your work has always read that way to me. Nothing seems to faze you.
I think I am. It feels like an honorific that maybe someone else should apply to me rather than me apply to myself. But I am, when I look back, and certainly Joyride was an opportunity for me to look back over my career, and I took stock in a very real way of how I've plunged in wherever my interests have taken me without fear, and I've moved forward without fear. I'm not brave in the sense of, wanting to be a war correspondent or wanting to bungee jump off the Eiffel Tower. I mean, there are physical things that are scary to me, but emotionally, I think I'm pretty fearless. I think I've had to be, to call up strangers and say, let me come hang with you and learn your life and tell your story. There's a certain social fearlessness that is necessary. I think also having the confidence to say to readers, let me tell you a story that I just learned. Let me introduce you to Jean Jennings, and you'll find her interesting, whether you're interested in interesting. In a way, that also requires emotional fearlessness. Being a writer is an act of performance that requires a lot of confidence and a lot of fearlessness.
I think that leads pretty well into our last question, which is, so you're clearly not done with your career, so why did you feel this was the right time to publish your memoir?
A couple of things. I was noticing that The Orchid Thief had come out 25 years ago, and that felt like such a monumental number that it made me very kind of reflective, thinking 25 years ago I wrote that, and that wasn't even my first book. So that made it even feel more like, wow, I've been doing this for a long time. I also think COVID made me really, turn the lens inward, as it did for so many of us, to take stock of life and what's important and what we've done and what we still hope to achieve. And that felt that the moment was such a self-examining one. I think certainly that's how I felt during COVID, which was to think what actually matters in life. So it put me very much in that mood of reflection and taking stock of where I've been. And I certainly don't see it as, I already have a next book project. So it certainly didn't mark the end of my career in any way, but it felt like a good moment to kind of take stock. And I'm glad that I did. I felt that it felt like the right moment to do it.
Can you tell us what the next book is?
Well, I'm not yet saying what it is because it's still kind of early. But it's a story about a really interesting building that is about as much as that's like the hint. And I think it'll be really interesting and really fun to do.
Susan, thank you so much for joining us. And Cherise, thank you for making this happen and for your questions. And, your enthusiasm. And Susan, it's just amazing to learn that the car person inside the writer and the journalist that we've known you as, to find your inner car girl is pretty cool.
It's definitely there. That's why when I met Cherise, I thought, well, and it's also very funny because when New York Magazine was doing a profile of me and they said, we want to, it was in New York City, we want to accompany you doing something that you associate with New York, and we went for a drive.
Yeah.
And they were very puzzled.
This was
Like,
so much
why
fun.
would you go for a drive? And I said, well, I did a lot of driving when I lived in New York City, believe it or not. And yes, I'm never quite far away from the suburban Cleveland girl. That is my birthright.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Wow, what a treat to be able to spend this time with Susan Orlean. She's been sort of a larger than life journalist in my career. She's been one of these people who I've always watched and always admired, and makes journalism look far more glamorous than it is. But you know what surprised me is, despite the title of her book, despite that she mentions some cars in her book, despite the fact that there's a car on the cover of her book, I did not expect her to be as much of a car girl as she is, and to say the empowering things that she did, or the validating, I guess really is the better word, things that she did about how we are as women.
I was surprised a
and
little bit.
owners of
As I
cars.
mentioned in the interview, I
Were you
was
surprised?
kind of surprised that, based on the title of the book, that more of that didn't come out in the book, but I understand why. It really is a memoir of her career as much as a memoir of her personal life. So I was a little surprised by that, but I just love her enthusiasm for being in a car, whether she's listening to an audiobook or listening to music, and just knowing, like, having the confidence to know that it's an extension of her personality and that it's the freedom to go anywhere you want. And that car should not be boring.
That was very rewarding, and that she's adventurous enough to switch brands and switch models and not feel like, I mean, I remember when I was a kid, like our family always owned GMs. My dad, whatever he bought would always be a GM until they bought a Chrysler. And it was like we were a GM family. And I remember thinking, like, what's it like to be a Ford family? And right? But the idea that you had to be one or the other was just so crazy. Now, I mean, as an adult, I go, well, that's the dumbest thing ever. Like, go figure out what you want and be adventurous about it, or, kind of stretch your muscle a little bit and find a car that fits your style and fits your personality and does the things you want it to do. And she has no fear about that. She just is like, there's so many different cars, and they're all so different, that she's had in her life.
So she talks a little bit in the memoir about how being in New York and being exposed to the fashion magazine side of the publishing world, how fashion became more important to her as an adult. And I kind of get the vibe that she sees cars and fashion as kind of akin to each other. Like, and I really like that approach. I think it's fun.
I think so too. And I appreciate that she said that, because I wish more women would think that. And I think a lot of times women feel like they don't feel entitled or empowered to make a decision on their own. They have to be respectful and draw on the opinion of their husband or their dad or their boyfriend or some other man in their life. And like, if he says, or they feel like, well, I just like luxury, and I live in a nice house, and I have a nice kitchen, and I have nice clothes, and I have nice accessories, so therefore I need a Mercedes. Like, Do you?
Yep.
Do you really? Can you not drive a Mini Cooper? She does. I love that. I love that so much. Or a Kia EV6, right? Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much, Cherise, for bringing Susan to our podcast, and thank you for joining me as my co-host today. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this podcast and encourage everybody to, first of all, thank you everyone for joining us. Please subscribe to our podcast. You can go to A Girl's Guide to Cars and find it right there on our homepage, or get our podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. What Drives Her from A Girl's Guide to Cars is produced by me and also by Natalie Marola. We are edited by Steph Howard, music by Envato.
Thank you.
And join us again next week when we will talk
All right.
another one.